The state. He has protected us when it comes from health care to the EPA to transportation. He has done a wonderful job, and we're blessed as a state to have a leader such as Governor Greg Abbott. Governor Abbott.
Thank you. Thank you all very much, and I really want to thank Senator Hancock. What you all don't know is that it seems like about 10 minutes ago, Senator Hancock was coming by where I was sitting right over here, and he saw that I was just beginning the process of eating my lunch. And he said, "Don't worry, I got you taken care of." He said he was going, in the introduction, to do a filibuster that would rival Wendy Davis to give me enough time to eat. So thank you, Senator Hancock, for that. We are so honored today to have with us someone who I characterize as a true Texan, and that is our special guest today, Dana Perino. Dana, thank you for being here. Now, I know that you're from what, Wyoming? We will be annexing Wyoming pretty soon, so you're going to be a Texan here pretty soon. And Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, great to be with you, and all the members of the Texas Senate and Texas House who made the last legislative session the best in anybody's memory. Thank you for what you all did last legislative session. We also owe great gratitude for all the sponsors who are at this event today. I can remember attending some of these luncheons in years past when the room was half this full. And it's great to see so many more people gathering as a part of the process as we forge the pathway for an even more prosperous Texas through true conservative principles and values. Listen, the fact of the matter is that TCCRI is one of the premier policy organizations in the entire United States of America. And one reason why that is so important is because of the effect that it has on the state of Texas. Another reason why it's important is because Texas is not like Las Vegas. What happens here does not stay here. What happens here, we make sure expands across the United States of America. As policy goes in the state of Texas, our goal is to make sure those same policies go throughout and change America the way that we've shown the Texas model work right here in the Lone Star State. Also, I want to express my gratitude to your executive director, who I am looking for right now, John Coliandro. John, where are you? Always in the back, always hiding. John does a fabulous job as the executive director of TCCRI. John also has been my policy director when I ran for Attorney General, when I ran for governor. And what I know is that what John designs today becomes law tomorrow. And John, thank you for your genius. Thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for your perspiration and all that you've done, because you have made a huge, huge difference. For example, what you all worked on before last session made the last legislative session one of the most effective. Texas led the nation in cutting taxes that were championed by TCCRI. Texas led the nation in securing the border, supported by TCCRI. Texas is a national leader fighting back against the federal government, in part because of the ideas and energy and support of TCCRI. Now, as we all know, and in fact, as we gather today, there is far more that we must do. One thing that we need to accomplish is we need to achieve genuine education reform that will transform the next generation in this state and in this nation. And to help spearhead that effort, I appointed the right person to head TEA in Mike Morath. Thank you, Chairman Morath, for being here. We need to ensure that the rule of law is going to be enforced in the state of Texas by banning sanctuary cities. And knowing that lower taxes is one of the best ways to attract job creators, especially at this time of low oil prices. We need to focus on finding even more ways that we can cut taxes even more so that we can continue to attract even more employers to this state. But I speak to you today from a perspective more broadly. The truth is that TCCRI's unrelenting commitment to bold policy solutions is needed now more than ever before. I realize that as we gather today and in the coming months, we are focused on the presidential race and the way in which that will affect the future of the country. We hope that we can elect the right person who will chart a pathway to get the United States back on the right course. But we need to recognize that the problems ailing America are far bigger than what any one president is capable of solving. The reality is that James Madison himself warned more than 2 centuries ago about the very challenges that we are dealing with today. He said at that time, there are more instances of the abridgment of freedom by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. Think about this as we have dealt with the challenges that we have faced from our own federal government. Think of the countless instances of abridgments of our freedom, both as individuals and as a state, by the multitude of the gradual and silent encroachment by those in power in Washington, D.C. That is what has happened in America over the course of the past century. We have a federal government where all 3 branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, have far exceeded the authority that has been given to them. They are imposing laws and regulations that have absolutely nothing to do with what they are authorized to do in the United States Constitution. And to follow up on a comment that was made by Senator Hancock, as the person who holds the record for suing Barack Obama, I can authoritatively tell you that it takes more than lawsuits to fix what is broken in Washington, D.C. Our collective efforts, and when I say our, I'm talking about legislators, those who are interested in policy-based issues, those who are involved in the legal process. Our collective efforts to tackle these problems reminds me of a parable that was told by Pastor Tony Evans from Oak Cliff in the Dallas area that some of you have heard before. It's a story about a homeowner who had cracks in the wall of his den at his home, and he wanted those cracks repaired. So he called a contractor to come out and paste over and paint over those cracks, and the den looked good again, and the homeowner was happy. Well, the year after that, the cracks reappeared, and the homeowner once again called the contractor and said, "The cracks have come back out. I want you to come back out and fix it again." So the contractor came out and pasted over and painted over the cracks, and the wall looked good again. Then a year later, the cracks reappeared. And by this time, the homeowner was frustrated and called the contractor and said, listen, I have called you out here twice. I have paid you twice to fix these cracks, but they keep coming back. And the contractor was blunt with the homeowner. He said, listen, I'm happy to keep coming out and pasting over and fixing up the cracks, but you need to understand, those cracks are never going to go away until you fix the real problem. The real problem is with your foundation. Until you fix the foundation, the cracks will continue to reappear. Well, what we have been doing, those of us involved in the policy world, we've been doing exactly what that contractor was doing. The repairs that come from the policy solutions that we have offered up fix only the cracks in the walls of the laws of government. If we really want to fix the problems that we face today, we need to repair our foundation. It's the fractured foundation of our government that's premised in the United States Constitution. Our government was founded on the rule of law, as opposed to the caprice of men that our founders fought to get away from. Until we fix the foundation by restoring the rule of law in the Constitution, all the repairs that we seek through the multitude of policy proposals that we offer up will never lead to lasting solutions. Take, for example, how President Barack Obama has repeatedly exceeded his executive powers to impose heavy-handed regulations on issues ranging from climate change to health care reform to his own immigration laws. His immigration executive order is particularly mind-boggling. Remember, the president himself said more than 20 times he didn't have the legal authority to unilaterally change the immigration laws in this nation. He said that that was something that was given solely to Congress under the United States Constitution. And yet, 2 weeks after the last election, the president abdicated his own advice and violated the United States Constitution by unilaterally changing the immigration laws through his executive order. Well, departures like this are no longer the aberration. Departures from our constitutional design like this are now the norm. Take, for example, Congress. Congress is required to consider whether it has a constitutionally enumerated power to pass a law. But today's approach is captured by what Nancy Pelosi said when she was asked to identify the constitutional principle upon which Obamacare was grounded. She derisively said, "Are you serious?" And the Supreme Court is an aider and abettor in abandoning the United States Constitution. Instead of applying the laws as they were written, the Supreme Court overtly rewrites those laws like Obamacare. And the court is increasingly departing from what the Constitution actually says. And instead, the Supreme Court is actively amending the Constitution by injecting words and phrases that are found absolutely nowhere in the United States Constitution. We have turned into a nation of men as opposed to a nation of laws that our founders intended. Well, the cure to these problems is not going to come from Washington, D.C. They will not come from any hopes that we lodge in whoever is elected to be the next president. The solution to these problems must come from the states themselves. The founders foresaw this very problem. They gave us a tool to deal with these challenges. They embedded that tool in Article 5 of the Constitution that provides for a convention of states. Now, this is nothing new to Texas. This is something that traces back far more than a century. The best that I can tell, the first convention of states that was passed in Texas was back in 1899. And it was an open-ended call for a convention of states that had no time limitation on it, meaning that it is still active and alive today, calling for states together to consider ways to amend the Constitution to put the country back on the right pathway. Then again, in 1977, there was another call for a convention of states, this one more specific, focused solely on a balanced budget amendment. And then again, with Representative Miller, I think, being the lead sponsor, the Texas House of Representatives this last session passed a call for a convention of states. Again, this one was focused on a balanced budget amendment, focused on term limits, and focused on limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. I know that there are senators who are ready, willing, and able to pick it up. Senator Perry, I know you were involved in it last time. Senator Betancourt, I don't know if you're here or not, but I hear that you are a leader of this charge. Good. He's back in the office working on it right now. Well, as we prepare for the next session, I have prepared a 90-page paper to further detail both the need for a convention of states as well as to offer some specific plans. In addition to the 90 pages that discuss that, we have more than 300 footnotes that you can look at citing our sources. And very appropriately, we call this the Texas Plan. Now, one part of the Texas Plan focuses on the 10th Amendment. The Texas Plan includes putting teeth in the 10th Amendment. Most of you all recall what the 10th Amendment says. It's very short and simple. It says that power not delegated to the United States by the Constitution is reserved to the states or to the people. And I got to tell you, during my time as Attorney General and as Governor, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times from very frustrated Texans. Why don't you just enforce the 10th Amendment? When Barack Obama refuses to secure the border, Abbott, why don't you just enforce the 10th Amendment? When Barack Obama allows Syrian refugees to come into the United States, Abbott, why don't you just enforce the 10th Amendment? Well, that is the problem. Where do you enforce the 10th Amendment? The Congress and the President openly scoff at the 10th Amendment, and they have reason to do so. It's because the United States Supreme Court has repeatedly denied states the ability to enforce the 10th Amendment. Texas has a lot of experience at dealing with this frustration at the courts. Texas invoked the 10th Amendment to challenge the federal government from forcing us to pay for the education, health care, and law enforcement expenses related to illegal immigration. It took the court just one page to dismiss our 10th Amendment claims as completely invalid. This is just one of a multitude of examples of courts dismissing states' attempts to assert the 10th Amendment. And one reason behind it is when the United States Supreme Court back in the 1980s rewrote both the substance and intent of the 10th Amendment. In a case that came out of Texas, Garcia versus San Antonio Metropolitan Transit Authority, the Supreme Court said the 10th Amendment is too complicated for the Supreme Court to apply. And states just have to rely upon the political process for states to be protected, meaning that we have to rely upon our elected officials in Washington, D.C. That turns the 10th Amendment on its head. Well, the Texas plan spells out that the 10th Amendment specifically gives states the authority to sue the federal government when the federal government assumes powers that are not delegated by the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, mending the 10th Amendment doesn't solve all of our problems. And that's because each branch of government has strayed from its intended role under the Constitution. So let me give you a pop quiz. Under the Constitution, which branch of government makes the laws? Nice, quick answer. Absolutely correct. Under the Constitution, it is Congress that is given the specific authority to make laws, and that is found in Article 1, Section 1 of the United States Constitution. And despite that fact, more than 90%, that's 90, more than 90% of the federal laws, rules, and regulations that govern your lives are never even voted on by the United States Congress. Instead, most federal law is made by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats at federal agencies like the IRS and our perennial favorite, the EPA. Now, get this. Without the approval of Congress, unelected bureaucrats at the EPA issued a 1,600-page Clean Power Plan. The Clean Power Plan will force businesses to shutter. It will cause jobs to be lost. It will cost consumers and businesses billions of dollars a year. But it goes from bad to worse. When Congress learned about the havoc that the Clean Power Plan was going to cause to the United States economy, the EPA was able to do what nobody else has been able to do. It galvanized Republicans and Democrats in both the House and Senate because together they passed a law overturning the Clean Power Plan. Then, with the stroke of a pen, President Obama abdicated the promise of the founders. He vetoed Congress's vote, and in doing so, he reinstated the EPA's administratively passed Clean Power Plan. And in doing so, he elevated an agency rule passed by the EPA above the rule of law that was passed by your elected representatives. Well, this Texas plan fixes that government run amok. Under the Texas plan, administrative actions like the EPA's would have no binding legal force unless and until they are voted on by the United States Congress. Now, the Texas plan has two amendments that rein in the United States Congress. One is that it restores the true intent of the Commerce Clause by preventing Congress from regulating intrastate commerce. The second, the Texas plan limits Congress's ability to spend your money. We have to come to grips with the reality that one of the most dangerous threats to our future liberty is the $19 trillion in debt that the United States Congress has sunk us into. Congress has demonstrated repeatedly. They are incapable of controlling themselves when it comes to spending. So it's time for the people to impose that control. The Texas plan joins 27 other states in calling for a balanced budget amendment. Pop quiz number 2 and the last quiz of the day. How many votes does it take to amend the Constitution? It's very complicated. No one knows the answer. How many votes does it take to amend the Constitution? 2/3 is the number I hear most often. 2/3 has a sense of accuracy to it. 3/4 has a sense of accuracy to it. The reality is that the United States Constitution is amended every single year with just 5 votes from people who wear black robes on the United States Supreme Court. In structuring the Constitution, Alexander Hamilton said this. He said, the courts would be the weakest and least dangerous branches of government. To the contrary, we've seen in just the past few decades how they can become the most dangerous because they can change any law without being accountable to anyone. Judges have moved far beyond just calling the balls and strikes and have turned into actively rewriting statutes themselves and even amending the Constitution itself. Well, the Texas plan addresses these challenges with 2 amendments. It takes 3/4 of the states to amend the Constitution through the ratification process. If that's the case, why is it that a simple majority of Supreme Court justices can accomplish the same task? I ask you this trivia question. Where in the Constitution does it say that just a majority of judges get to decide a case? The answer is nowhere. Where in federal law does it say that a majority of Supreme Court justices can decide a case? The answer is nowhere. This is a rule the judges made up themselves. So why is it that we allow a simple majority of Supreme Court justices to amend the Constitution? That circumvents the Constitution's amendment process when just 5 judges can overrule constitutional precedents or invalidate legislation. The Texas plan fixes that problem by setting the same 3/4 requirement for Supreme Court decisions that Article 5 already imposes for constitutional amendments. Now understand, for some of you, you're hearing this for the first time, but this is not a groundbreaking theory. Plans like this are already in effect in states like Nebraska and North Dakota. And by the way, I'm talking about what we're going to do on the federal side. I submit to our legislators here today, I think this is something that we should apply in the state of Texas also by requiring a supermajority of Texas Supreme Court justices to agree before they overturn legislation that represents the will of the people that you pass into law. And I say that to you as a former Texas Supreme Court justice. Additionally, the Texas plan would make Supreme Court decisions accountable to the people of America. Remember this, there was one premise more than any other that the United States Constitution was based upon, and that is the power of the people, not the power of the court. So we need to restore that power of the people. 5 unelected, unaccountable people on the Supreme Court should not be allowed to rewrite the laws of this land without the people of America having some level of a check and balance on that process. The Texas plan would allow a 3/4 majority of the states to override Supreme Court decisions. Well, it's clear that the federal government has sailed far from its constitutional moorings. The question is, what are we going to do about it? The founders clearly understood that the Constitution needed to be amended. Heck, the founders in the very first congressional session amended the Constitution many times. And they had written into the Constitution Article 5 that made clear that both states and citizens have the power to amend it too. Article 5 of the Constitution sets out that amending process. Going back to your point, 2/3 of the states can call for a convention of states to propose amendments. Importantly, no amendment would ever become effective unless and until it would be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Now, I've heard countless times people raise concerns, gosh, what do we have, a runaway convention? People, this is simple math. It's not Common Core math. All it takes is 13 states to block any crazy agenda item from ever taking place. To make the math simpler, to show the imperative of why now is the time for us to be able to accomplish this. As we gather today, there are 31 Republican governors in the United States of America. It takes less than half of the conservative-led states in the United States that can block any radical agenda item that could cause damage to our fundamental rights. We can and we should add additional safeguards. One way that we can do that is we need to ensure that we limit both the substance and the time of proposed constitutional amendments. As opposed to the 1899 Convention of States that was open-ended, that would allow any and everything in the Constitution to be evaluated, I think we need to have very specific items like what was in Representative Miller's proposal last time, as well as Senator Perry's plan last time. It doesn't open up the entire Constitution. It provides a limited focus. But I would add on, because I did not see this in what you all had last time, I would add a time limit to it, saying that this authorization to participate in a convention of state expires after 10 years. And the reason for that is simple. We have 31 Republican governors now. How many are we going to have in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years? I don't have a clue. We don't have a clue. By putting an expiration date on it, we can ensure that the authorization by the state of Texas to participate will no longer exist in the event that the leadership of the state of Texas takes a more liberal turn. Now, some people have warned, be careful what you ask for, because your Second Amendment rights are going to be taken away. These are people who simply don't understand what's going on in the United States of America today. Again, all it takes is 13 states to block anything like the Second Amendment from being hijacked. But here's the other thing that people like that simply do not get, and that is the decision out of the United States Supreme Court that protected your individual right to keep and bear arms was decided in a 5-4 decision with Justice Scalia writing the majority decision. If Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders appoints the successor to Scalia and other successors to the United States Supreme Court, the Second Amendment right that you know today will no longer exist. This is exactly why we can no longer trust those in leadership positions in Washington, D.C. to guarantee the protection of the liberties that we were given under the United States Constitution. Now, some of you think, well, gosh, Abbott, this sounds pretty cool, but we all know this is just a fiction because things like this are never going to happen. To those naysayers, I have two words: Greg Watson. Most of y'all don't know who Greg Watson is. In 1983, Greg Watson was an undergrad student right here on this campus. And he was taking a government class, and he had to write a term paper for his government class. And in going through the University of Texas library, he stumbled upon this old amendment that passed through Congress but was never ratified. He thought, well, this is pretty cool. He wanted to write a paper on how that amendment could actually become a part of the Constitution. His professor at the University of Texas was unimpressed and gave him a C grade on that paper. But for Greg Watson, the issue turned out to be far more important to him than any letter grade. It was now a cause, because this is something that resonated with him, but he found that it was something that resonated with the people of the United States, because the issue focused on a frustration Americans had at the time, and that was the United States Congress. This amendment is one that said that no congressional pay raise is effective until after the next election. The problem that Greg Watson had is that amendment was passed by Congress in 1789 and was about 200 years old. The other problem that he faced is that every law professor, every pundit, every critic in the United States of America said it no longer had vitality, and what he was trying to embark upon was completely impossible. The deal, though, is that Greg Watson was not a pundit. He was not a professor. He was a citizen who cared about the future of this country. So he started writing letters. This is before Facebook or Twitter or email. And he wrote letter after letter after letter. And he got one state to agree to it. Then he got another state to agree to it. Then he got 10 states to agree to it. Then he got 20 states to agree to it. And then finally, he got the 38th state to agree to it. This college paper project that Greg Watson embarked upon became the 27th Amendment to the United States Constitution because of one single individual. This can be done. And the process has already begun. States across the country, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Indiana, Tennessee, Alaska, and others have passed it or on the cusp of passing it. Frankly, that's a little bit embarrassing. This is the kind of issue that Texas should be leading on, not following on. We're the ones who fight back against the federal government. We're the ones who lead the charge nationally for setting the course of the direction for the future of this nation. So I urge you to once again repass exactly what was passed in the Texas House last session, and for the Senate to pass it also. Well, let me just close with this. After the close of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, Ben Franklin was asked by a bystander, "Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy?" To which Franklin responded, "A republic if you can keep it." That's the question we face today. Do we have the will to keep our republic? The good news is that the founders knew that if the three branches of government strayed from their intended role, there was a fourth group that could rein them in. And that fourth group was identified and written into the Constitution itself in the first three words, where it says, "We the people." In that same Constitution, Franklin, Hamilton, Madison, all of them gave us the tool to continue to chart our own destiny. That tool is Article 5 of the Constitution. The framers knew that citizens are the ultimate defense against an overbearing federal government. I say, let's heed the founders' advice. If we are going to keep the republic that Franklin said we got, then we need to take the lead in restoring the rule of law in the United States of America. This is exactly the kind of cause that TCCRI was made for. Take it up. Let's do it. Let's keep America great by restoring the rule of law. Thank you. God bless you all. God bless Texas. You can do it, man. Thank you for what you've done. Sure. Thank you all.